Welcome to Torah Today Ministries in our continuing series, Tehillim Talks, a study in the Psalms. And in this episode, we are looking at Psalm 24. Now again, I have to give a little introduction here as we look at this psalm. If you recall, in Psalm 22, which begins, my God, why have you forsaken me?" This gives a picture of crucifixion. We looked at the details in this psalm that depict our Messiah on the cross. It's an amazing psalm. Psalm 23, the Lord is my shepherd, is like the antidote to the pain that's experienced in Psalm 22. And then we come to Psalm 24, an amazing psalm of victory. And these psalms, these 10 psalms from 22 to 31, I believe give us a picture into the very heart and soul of Messiah in his crucifixion, his suffering, his resurrection, and what was going through his heart and mind during that time. Because in Psalm 31, we read the verse, "Into your hands I commit my spirit." So these 10 psalms tend to, in my mind, bookend the suffering of Messiah and give us a picture into what was in his very soul during those moments on the cross. Now, Psalm 24 was composed by David, and tradition teaches he composed this psalm for when the temple would be rebuilt and the Ark of the Covenant would be brought into the Holy of Holies. Now, the Ark of the Covenant is always a picture of God's presence. The Ark was not God, but wherever the Ark went, God's presence went with it. And that is why it was kept in the Holy of Holies. It was the focal point of his presence on earth. And in so many ways, the Ark of the Covenant is a picture of Messiah himself. Now, this psalm is read every Sunday morning by Orthodox Jews. It is the Sunday psalm. You may not know this, but in the prayer book, there's a psalm assigned to each of the 6 days of the work week. And Psalm 24 happens to be the psalm that is read on Sunday morning. On Monday, it's Psalm 18. Tuesday, it's Psalm 82. And I've put all these in the notes so you can see the list, and you may want to incorporate these psalms into your own morning prayers. So let's think for a moment. What was happening on the Sunday, the first day of the week, after Messiah's crucifixion? Well, of course, the answer is that's when he rose from the dead. Some people think it was Sunday morning when the sun came up. That's when Mary went to the tomb and met the resurrected Yeshua. But more likely, he is actually resurrected on Saturday evening at sundown, when the first day of the week began, when people were doing Havdalah at the end of Sabbath. That was probably the time when the tomb opened and Messiah emerged. But the thing you must realize is that in the temple on Sunday morning, the first day of the week, when Mary is meeting Yeshua at the tomb, this is the psalm that was being sung a short distance away in the temple, because the Levitical priest would sing these psalms according to the day of the week. And for Sunday, the first day of the week, Psalm 24. Keep that in mind as we go through this psalm. So let's begin. First 2 verses. "The earth is Adonai's and all it contains, the world and those who dwell in it. For he has founded it upon the seas, and upon the rivers he has established it." Now, when it says the earth is Adonai's, this might seem to be a bit of a contradiction, because later in Psalm 115, verse 16, we will read, "The heavens are Adonai's heavens, but the earth he has given to the children of man." So here it says the earth is Adonai's, but in Psalm 115 it says the earth he has given to the children of man. Can these both be true? Yes, absolutely. How many parables are there in the Gospels where we read of a king who goes on a journey, but before he leaves on the journey, he takes his possessions and his land, his vineyards, and he puts them under the authority of his servants. And then in the parable, he returns and then judges the servants for how they've taken care of his property or invested the money he left with them. The same is true here. The earth is the Lord's, but he's given it to the sons of man. He's given it to us for a time. But he's going to return, and then we have to give an account for what we have done with the provisions that he has given us. So the earth is Adonai's, though he's put us in a position to steward it. And all it contains, the world. And now this word for world is an interesting word. It's the word tavel. Most of the time we see the word aretz, which can also mean land, as being the word used for world. In Genesis 1:1, in the beginning God created the heavens and the aretz, the earth. But here's the word tavel. Tavel comes from the root balal, which means confusion. And in fact, the word tavel is a word that is also translated as perversion. Tavel refers to the world in its confused, kind of upside down, backward turmoil during this time that God's kingdom has not been established yet on earth. Let me give you an example. In Leviticus 18:23, it says, "And you shall not lie with any animal, and so make yourself unclean with it. Neither shall any woman give herself to an animal to lie with it. It is tavel." It's perversion. Leviticus 20 verse 12 refers to tavel as being perversion. And I'm sorry to have to quote a verse that is so perverse, but that gives you an idea of what tavel means. So it's saying that the earth is Adonai's, all it contains, even the tavel, even this confused, messed up world we live in, and all those who dwell on it, still belong to him. I know it might be hard to believe that God runs the world when it looks like he's nowhere in sight, but he is. And we get to choose what world we live in. If we see the world as being chaotic and godless and God is absent, then that's what we're going to experience. But if we see a world where, even among the chaos, God is present, God is at work, and God is present in our own hearts and lives, then that's the world you will live in. You can have two people sitting next to each other, yet they're living in two different worlds. Which world are you living in? So let's choose to live in a world where God is running the world and everything is going according to plan. God is in control. And when we do that, we will see all the good things happening in this tavel. All the wonderful things and the acts of love and generosity and kindness that take place everywhere around us. You won't hear much about these in the media, but then Satan is called the prince of the power of the air, or as I say, the prince of the power of the airwaves. But the good news is there. Have eyes to see it. And then it goes on to verse 2, "For he has founded it upon the seas, and upon the rivers he established it." Let's go on. Verses 3 through 6. It begins with a question. "Who may ascend into the hill of Adonai? And who may stand in the place of his holiness?" So first we see ascend, who can go up. Then we see the word stand. This means to remain. Who can remain there? There are some believers who just pop in on God once in a while. They ascend the hill, spend a little time in his presence. But there are other believers I know who stand there, who remain there. I want to be one of those. And it takes preparation, it takes endurance, it takes commitment to remain in God's place, the place of his holiness. But it answers the question, and there are 4 qualifications. First, he who has clean hands, and B, a pure heart. C, who has not lifted up my soul to vanity, and D, has not sworn deceitfully. Let's look at each of these individually. He who has clean hands, this refers to your actions. He who has clean hands. Do you have clean hands? I know we all mess up at times, but if you confess this to God and to the one you may have wronged and been purified, you have to have clean hands. You must live a righteous life. And second, you have to have a pure heart. In the Sermon on the Mount, Yeshua says this, in John 5:8, "Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God." People want to experience God. But if you're wanting to experience Him and your heart is not pure before Him, then you're going to have a hard time seeing Him. You're going to have a hard time staying in His presence. The question is, how do you get a pure heart? Well, I think part of the answer is in Psalm 19, if we go back there in verse 8. It says, "The precepts of Adonai are right, rejoicing the heart. The commandment of Adonai is pure, enlightening the eyes." Psalm 19 talks about how the Torah of God restores the soul. And here we see some things about the heart and about purity and the eyes. And the pure in heart are the ones who see God. The pure of heart and the clean of hands are the ones who can stand in His presence. So it all goes back to seeing God through the eyes of Scripture and yielding one's life to the precepts and the commandments of the Torah. But let's go on. There are two more. The third one, see here, "who has not lifted up my soul to vanity." Now it's interesting, your translation probably says, "who has not lifted up his soul to vanity," referring to you and me, to the one who's reading. But in the Hebrew, God is speaking and says, "has not lifted up my soul to vanity." Which is it? Well, let's start with my soul. You know, if we bear God's name, we claim to be His followers and His disciples, disciples of Yeshua. And yet our lives and hearts don't reflect that. Aren't we lifting up His name to vanity, to emptiness? How many people call themselves Christian, and yet they do not follow Christ? How many people say they're followers of God, but when you look at their lives, you start to wonder, which God? That doesn't look like the God of the Scriptures. So God says, "you must not lift up my soul to vanity." But likewise, you must not lift up your own soul to vanity. Don't invest your soul in things that don't matter, things that are just breath, things that are just passing away. Invest your soul in things that last for eternity. Lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where rust and moth don't corrupt and thieves don't break through and steal. For where your treasure is, that's where your heart will be also. So where are you investing your strength and time and possessions? In the eternal or in the temporary? And then there's a fourth, "who has not sworn deceitfully." So in other words, you're careful of your speech. Your yes is yes, your no is no. You don't say one thing and then do another. So in these four, we see clean hands, we see deeds, a pure heart, we see motives, has not lifted up his soul or my soul to vanity, we see the thoughts there. And then fourth, has not sworn deceitfully, we see speech. Those are four things that are a full-time responsibility. And if we pay attention to those four things in our life, we'll be doing very well. Then what happens to this person? What's the result, the reward for a person who practices these four things? He shall receive a blessing from Adonai and righteousness. Tzedakah is the word. The word tzedakah can mean righteousness. It can also mean charity from the God of his salvation. I have over here somewhere, right here, I have a tzedakah box. And this is the word tzedakah on the front. A tzedakah box is like a piggy bank. I shouldn't use the word pig in reference to a tzedakah box, but this is where you can drop some coins, drop some money. And in a synagogue, and I know at Beth Tikkun, we never took up an offering, but we had a tzedakah box. And people could drop in money there, their tithes and offerings and so on. And oftentimes, if you go to a Hebraic store, they'll have some small tzedakah boxes by the checkout. So you can drop in some coins for different charities, because charity, the word is tzedakah. And some people even have a tzedakah box because before they go to God to pray, they feel like they should take something of their own and give it to charity. So they'll have a tzedakah box, drop a few coins in, and then they'll go about their time of prayer and study. So they want to precede their prayers with some practical action. So I'm getting to this because this word tzedakah is interesting because the root of the word is zedek. And zedek means justice. So the root of tzedakah, charity or righteousness, is the word zedek, which means justice. And many of the rabbis have written about the relationship of zedek, justice, with tzedakah, righteousness and charity. And there are many works out there that go into great detail, and it's illuminating to read this, to understand there is a connection between the two. I'm going to read you just a very short excerpt from Rabbi Samson Raphael Hirsch. And this is what he says. Now remember, as we go through this, zedek is justice, tzedakah is righteousness or charity. This is what Hirsch says. When God does tzedakah, he bestows favor on his creatures out of his grace, not on account of their merit. Tzedakah means to give the other person what he needs, to be good to him, to seek his welfare and well-being. Zedek, on the other hand, rectifies the world and promotes the happiness of the individual and the community. So justice is something that makes the world right. Don't you pray for justice in this world because we see so much injustice? And let me go back to the quote. Through the attribute of zedek, justice, every creature will have the benefit of the conditions intended for it by divine design. Zedek is the goal of God's direction of the world. From man's point of view, zedek is the ideal. Justice is the ideal. Any divine or human act that brings the individual or the community nearer to this goal is tzedakah. Anything, catch that again, anything that helps bring people closer to zedek is tzedakah. That's called tzedakah. Zedek is required for tzedakah, and tzedakah leads to zedek. You know, in the Torah, in Deuteronomy 16:20, it says, "Justice, justice shall you follow, that you may live and inherit the land that Adonai your God is giving you." In Hebrew, it's zedek, zedek you shall follow. It's repeated. It's emphasizing that righteousness, this justice, is what we must pursue at all times. And we've all read about Melchizedek, right? Did you hear that part of his name, Melchizedek? Melchizedek, his name means king, Melech of Tzedakah, or Zedek, righteousness or justice. The king of justice or king of righteousness. And Hebrews 7 talks about him in some detail and calls him the king of righteousness. The Messiah himself has an interesting name. In Jeremiah 33, verses 15 and 16, this is what we read. "In those days and at that time I will cause a righteous branch." In Hebrew, that's a zemek tzedakah, a righteous branch, "to spring up for David, and he," this righteous branch, shall execute mishpat, justice, and righteousness, tzedakah, in the land. So he shall execute justice and righteousness in the land. In those days Judah will be saved, and Jerusalem will dwell securely. And this is the name by which it shall be called: Adonai Zidkenu, Adonai our righteousness. So we see here that righteousness, justice, tzedakah, charity are all tied together. They're all very closely related, and they're all extremely important to God. So whenever you do a work of charity, giving to someone, think also of justice, of doing justice. Because by giving charity, you're bringing justice and righteousness into the world. And whenever justice and righteousness in the world is done, and we have righteous and just laws, guess what? It comes across as charity and goodness and righteousness to the people who live under those laws. Well, I could spend a lot of time talking about this, as you can tell. But I want to get to this next section. Now remember again, this is the psalm that was being sung in the temple, Psalm 24, on Sunday morning, on the first day of the week, when Yeshua is having this conversation with Mary at the tomb. And she comes to anoint the body of Yeshua. She sees the stone rolled away, and the tomb is empty. She comes out, and she hears a voice thinking it's the gardener, and then the voice says, Mary. She turns and recognizes her Savior. And she embraces him. And I know he had to be laughing. I can't wait to see how The Chosen renders this particular episode. But he says, but don't hold on to me. I've not yet ascended to my Father. And what a joy that must have been. So keep this in mind, and let's look at the final part of this psalm. Verses 7 and 8 say this, Lift up your heads, O gates, and be lifted up, O everlasting portals, that the King of glory may come in. Who is this King of glory? Adonai, strong and mighty. Adonai, mighty in battle. Then the next two verses are almost identical. Verses 9 and 10 say, Lift up your heads, O gates, and lift them up, O everlasting portals, that the King of glory may come in. Who then is this King of glory? Adonai Zevaot, Adonai of hosts, or Adonai of armies. He is the King of glory. Why do we have this repetition? Well, something's being emphasized here, but there's enough difference between these two couplets that we see that there's something a little different being addressed in each one. You may note that I put above the first couplet, verses 7 and 8, the first advent. I believe, and this is my opinion, you could disagree, but I believe verses 7 and 8 are referring to Yeshua's battle in the Garden of Gethsemane, where he won over his own physical desire to sidestep the cross. He cried sweat drops of blood in the garden. And he said, Father, if it's possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, your will, not mine, be done. And he won that battle. He went to the cross. He endured the pain and the shame and the agony. He endured it. He went through it, and then said, into your hands I commit my spirit, and then died. He won that battle. And when we look at these two verses, you see here's an individual. Lift up your heads, O gates, and be lifted up, O everlasting portals, that the King of glory may come in. Who is this King of glory? Adonai, strong and mighty. Adonai, mighty in battle. So there's a battle here, but there's only one person fighting on the side. That's Adonai. But when you look at the next two verses, the battle's not being fought by an individual. It says, Lift up your heads, O gates, and lift them up, O everlasting portals, that the King of glory may come in. Who then is this King of glory? Adonai of armies, Adonai of hosts, Adonai Zevaot. And when you go to Revelation 19, we read about a coming battle. And this is the battle where God once again, and Messiah, fights a battle and returns to earth. And this time he's accompanied by armies. And this, I believe, is referring to that coming battle when God will return to his temple. Messiah will come and establish his kingdom on earth. Now recall that tradition says that this psalm was written by David to celebrate the day when the Ark of the Covenant would be placed in the Holy of Holies. He longed to see a temple built, but he died before it could be built, and Solomon, his son, is the one who fulfilled that desire of David's and built the temple. and the ark was then placed in it. And I'm sure they sang Psalm 24 when they brought it in. The Ark of the Covenant, again, as I started with, represents God's presence on earth. Messiah represents God's presence on earth, because the scriptures tell us that God was in him, reconciling the world to himself. So wherever Messiah went, whatever he spoke, whatever he did, we see the actions of the Father. We hear the words of the Father. And so as Yeshua rises from the dead, and as Yeshua returns to the temple made without hands, I believe these words are appropriate for him as he entered that temple. And I believe verses 9 and 10 are appropriate words for when he comes to the temple that will be on earth, and he brings his kingdom and his presence there. It's a glorious psalm, a wondrous psalm. And I hope that when they film this episode of The Chosen, that you'll be able to hear these words being sung in the distance by the priestly choirs when Yeshua is there, resurrected, and meeting Mary. So we'll see. But either way, I hope this psalm rejoices your heart, and gives you food for thought, and is a blessing to you as it's been a blessing to me as I study it. I'm going to close with just two more passages. The first is from Zechariah 9:9. It says, "Rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion. Shout aloud, O daughter of Jerusalem. Behold, your king is coming to you. Tzaddik, righteous, and having salvation is he, humble and mounted on a donkey, on a colt, the foal of a donkey." When you read that, you should right away go over to Revelation 19 and read, I think it's from about verse 11 on down, about how Messiah returns, not riding on a donkey, but riding on a war horse coming out of heaven. What a day that's going to be. I'm looking forward to seeing that. But the final passage is this, 1 John 2:1, and I'm reading it from the Complete Jewish Bible. "My children, I am writing you these things so that you won't sin. But if anyone does sin, we have Yeshua the Messiah, Ha-Tzaddik, the righteous one, who pleads our cause with the Father." Our God is righteous. Our King Messiah is righteous. And he calls us to also live lives of righteousness and tzedakah and charity. So let us pursue these things as we bear his image in this world. So next time, until then, till Psalm 25, I wish you shalom, and may God bless.
Thank you for joining us for today's teaching. If the work of Torah Today Ministries has touched your life, please consider making a donation or sponsoring an upcoming video. As a video sponsor, you'll have an exclusive opportunity to memorialize a family member, celebrate a special event, or simply support the ongoing creation of similar content. Your tax-deductible contribution helps ensure that our teachings continue to reach all who are longing for truth. Click the link or visit our website to learn more.
Amen.